Welcome to the Beat Pain podcast. We're talking about chronic pain and illness and health related issues and the alternative solutions we can find to fix those. Today, I'm super honored to have back on Dr. Evan Parks. Welcome to the show, Evan. It's good to see you again.
Thank you very much, Brandon. And I'm looking forward to our time together.
Yeah, me too. So last time when I had you on, it was like 2 years ago now, I think it was. We were talking a lot more about chronic pain, like physical pain that people are having and different visualization exercises and accepting the pain and how they can work through that. Today, we're talking about something a little bit different. What are we talking about today?
We're going to talk about anxiety. We're talking about the kind of pressure that we're under right now, in part because of world events, pandemic, family issues that impact us on a daily basis that make life challenging.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this with you today. I've got my whiteboard here with plenty of space for notes and everything. This is a big topic, and there's a lot that I want to make sure I can learn from you on this, because like you're saying, in light of current events, it feels like the discussion of anxiety and stress has changed. The stakes got higher, it seems.
Yes, they sure have.
I'm curious for you, is this something you were already looking into, researching, talking about before COVID, or is this kind of come up? Okay, so this is an old conversation for you, but maybe more relevant to talk about now since COVID has happened.
Yeah, thank you so very much for asking that question. That's actually a nice way for us to get started.
Great.
I spent 15 years working overseas. I was in Budapest, Hungary, and I traveled around. And I was on the scene when a lot of difficult things were happening. So back in 1999, for example, there was a conflict in Kosovo, which is just north of Macedonia, and was a breakaway area of Serbia. And so I was there at that time, kind of walking alongside people who were on the scene doing work with refugees coming out. And fast forward a little bit, I was there in Ukraine in 2014 when Russia took Crimea. As the Syrian refugees and came pouring into Europe in 2015, 16. And so my work generally has revolved around helping humanitarian organizations, faith-based organizations, missions, NGOs that are on the scene of these events, intervening, and longer term work, reestablishing services in countries, setting up refugee centers, setting up orphanages, all those kinds of things. So the people who are doing that work are good-hearted people. They get burned out, they get traumatized. And so a part of my work was helping them process that, see if they could get their feet under them while they're doing that, or if not, where do I get them help and get them out? So that was kind of my work. And so recently, with the current issues that are going on in Russia, Ukraine, with the long-term impact that's coming from the pandemic that's not quite, off the scene, and nobody actually knows if it ever will be off the scene. I'm seeing on a day-to-day basis in the work that I do, which is pain rehabilitation, this extra weight that's not only on the patients that we're seeing, but on the staff that is providing those very services that people need help with. Because we're a part of it as well. And we see the pressure that's on hospital systems, medical systems to, keep things afloat because of so many things that have changed that have made it harder, for healthcare systems to work. So it seems like there are so many things that are coming at us from different angles that really make it hard for us to keep off balance. So what really interested me in talking more about this is because it's just everywhere now. It's not just like, oh, somebody has gone through this specific issue in their life, and we could understand that, they had a difficult divorce, or their house was on fire or something like that. Now, I think broadly speaking, we can see that, people that were in line with at a grocery store are on this thin edge of, tolerance for frustration.
Mm.
And that's just not the way things were pre 2020. It didn't seem to me, anyway, in my experience, just being in the public, that people had such a low frustration tolerance. But what we all hear about with people who are flying regularly, I don't do that anymore. I don't fly regularly, but people who are, I mean, the airlines, are very stressed by the people who are flying because their frustration tolerance is so low. And so I don't know if there is increased incidences of road rage, but I could imagine that there could be.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's the kind of thing that I'm sensing, is that people are working with a very little in reserve, to handle the kind of changes and pressures and unexpected things that happen, because unexpected things are happening regardless. Because we all have health changes, we all have status changes in our life, unexpected things that come, hit us financially. I mean, that's going to happen anyway, but it seems like we now have this added layer or two or three of things that aren't necessarily going to go away anytime soon, and create then uncertainty. And that uncertainty is something that is just perfect fuel, for our anxiety trigger to get hit.
Mm. That's fascinating that you have done a lot of work specifically with refugees and a lot of country crises, because that really does give you a great perspective looking now on our situation where people, it's not necessarily in the United States like a refugee situation where people are fleeing, but there is an interesting situation where a lot of people have migrated out of big cities to more rural areas. And so then you have new jobs, you have new houses, this entire shift of life, not necessarily from like a war, but from a pandemic. How would you relate maybe some of the things from the pandemic stress from maybe some of the work experience you had with refugees? Do you see similarities between those?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So a lot of the changes that happen with a refugee, of course, are unexpected and unwanted, but they're made to adapt. I mean, they are forced to adapt, rather. I mean, they have to say, okay, this is my new country, or this is my new town, or this is my new language. And with the things that are happening, for us locally, people that I know, close friends, have lost jobs. And, they're mid-career, they're, settled, in a community, settled with the home. And as, another layer, of course, is housing, right? So everybody in America could sell their house within days. I mean, that's not a problem for any of us. You just can't find another one. Right? I mean, where are you going to move if you sell your house? And it's like, that is very similar to, the kind of situation that people who are coming out of one country into another, I mean, they cannot picture, like, what will this look like? And we love to be able to anticipate our futures, plan it out, say, okay, this step is going to happen, I'll accomplish this, and and then we're going to do this, down the road, and that'll be the next stepping, and we love that. But when that picture is blank, that is really hard for us to handle. And people here in the United States are in those situations, in part because of changes. They used to work in an office, now they're at home, and so many people find that very challenging if they're at a stage of life where their kids are at home, or they have aging parents at home, or they physically don't even have space to have a private work area, to do that. The challenge that we faced within our own family related to that was, my son, who was our youngest at that time, was, in the middle of his senior year, trying to finish high school, and the school closed, everything goes virtual. He has AP classes that several teachers resigned,
Mm,
and so he's like left on his own basically to finish his education,
mm, yeah.
At home.
Yeah.
And like, what does that look like? I mean,
Hmm.
nobody was picturing that, and fortunately, our home was relatively stable. I had a job. I wasn't, needing for us to move. He had physical space. We had the internet connection, so relatively speaking, he did pretty well in that. But so many people that we know didn't have some of those things in place of stability or place or resources to make that transition.
Mm,
And, like a refugee, you just have to make do the best you can, in the circumstances that you're in, because you really have no control. And that experience of not having control is something that we're either going to fight against and really struggle with and make ourselves miserable, or learn how to grapple with somehow. And I think that's kind of where our discussion will end up going, is like, how do we grapple with this fact that we don't actually have the kind of control that we once thought we had, and
yeah.
maybe actually never did have.
Very true. Very true. It's
So,
so relevant when hearing you talk about it, so relevant just to my own life situation since, the 2 years ago we chatted. I've already kind of shared my story on the show, so I'll try not
mhm,
to regurgitate too much, but just for
yeah.
your own update, I moved out of California. So now I've become a California refugee. I sometimes should
Ah,
say that. And
yeah.
I moved up to
Hmm.
North Idaho. Same
Hmm.
thing. COVID shut down my whole practice that I had in Santa Barbara, California. And
Hmm.
I moved to a different state where I could open up again, and find work.
Yeah.
It's like, where do I find a
Right.
job and a place to
Right.
live, and without going into massive amounts
Yeah.
of debt that was happening back in Santa Barbara. And
Hmm.
same thing, I tell a lot of folks when they ask me about my move, I say, I had my 5-year plans, I had my business, my career plan, everything set out. And I finally got to the point of, I'm not in control. I'm surrendering. It's just, yeah,
Yeah.
providence. Whatever God wants to do with me is going to happen right
Yes.
now, because I have absolutely nothing I can do
Right.
to
Right.
try to make my situation work. It's just sort of beyond
Yeah.
hope. So now I surrender. Well, we'll see what
Right.
happens. And
Yeah.
fortunately, it's all worked out. I'm very thankful.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
getting to that place of giving up control was pivotal. And it literally like clicked and shifted the stress in my brain. As soon as I just was like accepting the fact that this is my
Yes.
situation, it was like, okay, that's it. No more stress.
In
Just what's the next step?
Yeah. Isn't that neat? That
Yeah.
is, yeah. I mean, that's where we're going to spend some time talking. It's like, how do we do that?
Yeah.
And why should we do that? And why do we fight so hard to get to that place and stay in that place? But it is just really hard for us to be in that position of surrender and trust, like
Mm,
it will work out.
mm,
I am, I like this kind of mantra, I am the kind of person who is able to bounce back and to move forward,
mm,
and
mm.
to keep reminding myself of that. um yeah. So yeah, you walk through it. You
Yeah.
have walked through it.
Yeah. So I'm curious. I know that there's a lot of things that go into the development of people having stress and anxiety.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, kind of, what's the first stage of somebody beginning the anxiety? Is it, for me, I'm giving dramatic examples and there's a big pandemic and there's all these things that are
Hmm.
happening. But what's maybe the initial stage of like, okay, somebody's getting anxiety coming into their life. How do they make note of it, become aware of it, and then start to either be preventative or try to take action in those initial stages?
Yeah. So what I think typically happens, and I don't have research to back this up, but it's a personal impression, is I think that initially we're pretty good at suppressing the signs that we're anxious. So we're pretty good at buckling down, working harder, discounting what we feel, and go to our default mode of, let's push through.
Yeah.
Let's problem solve. I can figure this out. And so some of those early signs, I think, of not having control, of not having some of our needs met or having our needs threatened, I think we tend to discount and just say, oh, I can handle this. and then a week goes by, 2 weeks go by, and then what we'll notice is something physiological. Our appetite changes, our sleep changes. Your massage therapist, people are like, oh, I'm tight, I'm uncomfortable, I got this knot in my shoulder. And and you ask them, hey, how are things going? Oh, pretty good.
Yeah.
And it's just like, well, our body betrays us. Our body says, yeah, I don't think so. And so some of those early signs, I think, are physiological, that we could be paying attention to. Our digestive system starts shutting down. It's like, oh, it's been a couple of days since I've used the bathroom. It's like, what does that mean? It's like, well, you have a stress response going on there.
Right.
And so I have found it's helpful for people to have a little bit of a definition of the term anxiety. So I'll give that, and I'll then link that to what I think typically triggers it.
Okay.
So in talking with men in particular, I think it's, for whatever reason, cultural reasons, it's harder for many men to say, oh, this is what I feel. But I think part of that is not having a word for it, not having the custom of using language to describe those states that we're in, or link them, to the things that a person actually needs. So what I picture anxiety being related to is a sense of lack of control in situations in which we would typically want to have some kind of control. So the easiest example for me, since I live in a snowy state, is a icy road. You're driving down the road, it's snowy, you got some traction, but you hit this, packed ice section, looks just the same as anything else, but all of a sudden you realize, oh, I am not in control of this big old vehicle here. And anxiety just like goes right through the roof. And so when we're in a situation in which we are wanting to have some kind of control or belief that we do, and we're not, that triggers something. Second part of that, though, so the first part is there's a threat. So, the icy road would be the threat. The second part of that is our capacity to handle that threat. It's like, what can I do when that threat is here? And if that threat is high, and our belief that, we're not able to like rise to that challenge is low, then we're going to have anxiety. So that threat could be high, but we actually might feel like, okay, in this situation, I think I can handle this. I have the reserve. I've been saving money for the last, 30 years, and I've got this massive bank account. I just lost my job. I'm going to weather this. So, they have some capacity, but not everybody has the same skill set, support system, financial, flexibility, and so depending on what that situation is, how we could respond to that threat is going to vary from person to person. So, and you have, a coping response. And so those two things, interact with each other to some degree, so that we, in many situations, feel like, okay, I don't feel like I have the kind of control that I would want. And I then have this anxious feeling. And so that is helpful for people to make the concept of anxiety less mysterious. So they can start looking through their life and going, okay, in what situations do I not feel like I have much control? And one area might be finances. Um, uh, Housing prices or food prices, gas prices, are going up faster than our income typically. Our income isn't going up with all of these things. So many people right now in this situation are looking at these next, few weeks, few months, and go, okay, I can kind of hold on, for the next few weeks like this, but like if it keeps going up, what am I going to do? And if they really don't know what that plan is, then, and they don't feel like they have any flexibility or any resources that they can tap into or do something different, then their anxiety is going to go up for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like people are dealing with it in the best way. I think you sent me a few numbers here of how folks in the past couple of years have been dealing with some of their stress and anxiety in some pretty unhealthy ways. I mean, I think everybody knows that alcohol consumption has gone up over the past couple of years, but I think you sent me something about how cigarette usage has gone up too, and a lot of diseases have gone up because of related problems. And yeah, we are stressed, and we're not really doing the best things we can to try to fix it, unfortunately.
Yeah, we are coping, but not with strategies that help us. I mean, they just create another layer of problem. So that's a very basic thing about distress. Anxiety is one form of distress. Grief could be another form. Fear is another form. Sadness, depression, another form. But you just lump them all together and let's call it distress. When distress shows up, our typical reaction is like, how do I distance myself from that? And that action of distancing ourselves from our distress is something that becomes its own problem. And its own with consequences, because we end up really struggling then with another layer of problem in our life. So I know people who are coping with their financial stress right now by turning to the lottery. Right? The little money that they have available to them, they're buying tickets. And it's like, that's going to bite. That's going to be another consequence in that person's life. Or tuning out, Netflix, subscriptions, of course, skyrocketed, in part because, people are at home and they're bored, but also to distance, so there are a number of things that we do in response to our distress that actually start to make it a bit worse. And one of the strategies that I think is very important is to have a person not only recognize what it is that they're feeling, but to recognize that their kind of autopilot response to it is something that is in the category of control and avoidance. Like, how do I control and avoid this distress? And that action of control and avoidance is something that lends itself to wrestling then with our thoughts, wrestling with our feelings, trying to push things away. And the things that we turn to, distraction, opting out, analyzing things to death, substances, self-harm, those kinds of things that we turn to work in the short term, right? They're powerful. Nothing like meatloaf and mashed potatoes to, push that depression away.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, if it didn't work to get away from the problem, then people wouldn't do it. Yeah, they work for something, just it's not a long-term strategy. It's not an effective strategy. Yeah.
Right. And then it becomes not only a challenge to recognize those emotions, recognize what's triggering it, but to realize that we have these automatic processes that we've learned. We see other people do that. our advertising system, that is selling us stuff is feeding into that. What you need in order to be satisfied in life is this, and we go, oh yeah, I guess I need that. And then we start, getting into what I think is a struggle cycle where we are getting a little bit of relief, but the next day, whatever worked yesterday is out of our system and we're back to the struggle where we're at. Meanwhile, we get further and further away from the things that are really important to us, the things that are meaningful, the things that, could make our life rich and rewarding. And, it's almost like we're in a boat that's just gotten disconnected from the dock, and, you're drifting out and you don't even realize it until you're so far out there. It's like, where's the dock? And that happens then with us when we're so disconnected from the things that are meaningful to us that we can hardly remember like what a good life would look like, because all we know now is the struggle. And that might be at a point when people are showing up at your office. They feel really bad. They forgot why. But they have all the symptoms, of being a hurting person under a lot of pressure. And we get good at disconnecting, the emotions that we have from the events and from the needs that we have that trigger that. And reconnecting that, is a part of that healing process, helping people be aware of what they need, what they want, what they feel, what their body is telling them, and listening to that is a part of that, healing process, reconnecting the mind and the body. So we go, okay, this information is important. And what else can I do with that distress besides doing my control and avoidance dance that me and all my neighbors are doing? How do I go in a different direction?
So there's anxiety. We got the problem. There's a lot of bad ways that people are trying to cope with it, mechanisms that are medicating for things in an unhealthy way. And we're kind of talking a little bit about how people need a strategy. People need to bring more awareness and focus to what's happening in their life. What are some practical ways people can try to address the anxiety that they have?
Yeah. So one of the things that I like to start with is helping people put a name on what it, not put a name on, but to visualize what being unbalanced looks like. So we all know what it feels to feel like off balance, and we use that word regularly. So I try to give a word picture that I think is helpful, and then can become kind of a check-in, so that when a person notices their feelings or notices maybe just their behavior, their coping style, that they can ask themselves, kind of go in reverse order. Okay, how do I trace this back to a source? How do I trace this back to what's going on? How do I name this better? Because what we name, we can tame, but if we can't name it, it kind of runs us. So a visual picture that I use is a choir, and the choir is going to represent our brain activity. And when you think of a choir, you have four sections. Typically, you have bass, tenor, alto, and sopranos. And when all those sections of the choir are operating well, and there's a choir conductor, and the choir conductor has music, then there's going to be harmony. And if the choir director loses control of the choir or the director itself isn't following the music, then you're going to see one of two things, or both. You're going to see chaos or disharmony. So you're going to have, in regards to the brain, you're going to have kind of emotional dysregulation, you're going to have unwanted thoughts, you're going to have this plague of doubts, you're going to have unrealistic fears, you're going to have maybe addictive behavior, dysregulation. So not everybody is using that word dysregulation a lot. I use it a lot since I'm a psychologist, but you just think of it as just distress, and it's just messy, and so when our lives get messy, that means that we're not balanced. But the other extreme is rigidity, and rigidity is inflexibly responding to that distress. So we have distress maybe about a relationship, and an inflexible response to that distress would be, I'm just not going to ever talk to that person again. I'm going to leave my job. Anybody who disagrees with me, is, against me. And I cannot tolerate anybody who disagrees with me. And rigidity means that we're inflexible at looking at the range of problems that are in front of us, the range of possible solutions. And we kind of conclude it's like, oh, all my problems are equally big, all my solutions are equally bad, and there's nothing that I can do, or I have to do this one thing. So in real life, there isn't just one thing that typically solves our problems or could make things better. There's a number of things, and they're on a range or on a spectrum of, from really ineffective to really good, and, we have to experiment with things. That's a flexible approach, is to try to see what would work, what would make things better. But when we're rigid, things become black and white when life isn't that way. And we use that effort to control and avoid. It's like, okay, I'll deal with my distress by stopping it. I'll deal with my distress by not thinking about it. I'll deal with my distress by, well, I'm just going to avoid that person, avoid that store, avoid that meeting. I'll just work from home because I can't handle the anxiety there. Those are all control and avoidance things. But when we're doing the rigid response and we have this kind of internal distress or behavioral dysregulation, we know that we're not balanced. So then what then is balanced? So balance is this ability for us to monitor the brain activity, the things that we feel, the things that we think, the things that we desire, the things that we need, our connections with the other, our physical response, our awareness of the five sense experiences around us, and be able to look at that and guide it in a direction. This is the direction that I want to be going. And so with the music metaphor, the choir metaphor, that direction would represent the music. It's like, what is that brain supposed to be doing in this situation? How should it be responding? What should be guiding it? And so when we start like being aware, number one, monitoring that, and then having some kind of reference point of saying, oh, I want to go in this direction, then we can start modifying that brain activity. So I keep going like this because what I picture is a circle. I picture this nice little wheel, and on this rim of the wheel, are my five sense experiences. That's my brain's awareness of everything going on around me. Another section of the wheel is my physical body giving me information. So we have all kinds of information given to us from our body about tension, about movement, about discomfort, about stress, about emotions. And then another section on this wheel would be our thoughts, our feelings, desires, needs that we have. And we can be aware of that. And the fourth section of this wheel, fourth section of the choir, would be our awareness of connections with others, the people who are important to us, the people that we care about, the strangers that we even have connection to, even though we don't even know these people, but we see them regularly and we have empathy for the lives that they live. So that hub is our mind. Our mind has this ability to kind of, if you picture looking down on the activity of the brain, five sense experiences, the body, the mental activities of thinking and feeling and meeting, and our social connection. and be able to monitor that and say, okay, I'm in charge here. And so I'm going to pay attention to what the world is telling me, what my body is telling me, what my, emotions and thoughts are telling me, and what my connections are like with others. But here's the key thing. When we're doing that, we're making a separation between our brain activity, our noisy mind, and my ability to observe it. And when I start realizing that I am not my thoughts, there's real power in that. Because typically when we're anxious, we're hearing our noisy, unhelpful mind, and we feel that activity, that dialogue is true, it's important, it's valid, and we're sunk, and or we're not worth much, or we don't have enough, or things aren't going to change. So that noisy mind that we have, it is doing some very predictable things. It's labeling things typically as good or bad, or I like it. It's it's predicting, oh, this is what's going to happen. It's judging, well, these things are happening because, if you would have done this better. It's storytelling. Well, this is who you were, this is who you are, this is who you're going to be. It's comparing us to others. Other people going through this are handling it better than you are. Other people are happier than you are. What's wrong with you? Other people plan better than you have been, and they're not caught off guard by this. How come you are?
Yeah.
So with our noisy mind, we have to realize that it's not helpful to us. And so the noisy mind doesn't cause the out of control experience that we have, because that is external. I mean, that could be a very real thing that's happening, right? A person does lose their job, a person is in a financial crisis, or they have a significant health change because of COVID or something else, and their future looks different. Yeah, that does happen. But how that noisy mind starts responding to it is fundamentally unhelpful. And to have this perspective that my observing self is able to look at that mental activity and realize that that mental activity doesn't represent really who I am. And what I picture as who I am is this choir director, this person who has this sense of, but this is the direction that I'm going to go with my life. This is what I want to represent who I am. This is the kind of impact that I want to have on the world around me. And that defines us, not where we've come from, but where we're going. Our noisy mind says our past defines us, our circumstances define us. And it's easy to believe that, easy to listen to that, easy to feel bogged down by that and blocked by that, because when we start listening to that story, it's never a good story. It's never a good story. So in terms of technique, that's where we started with this question. What I start off with is wanting people to picture this sense that when we're off balance, we're going to see distress, we're going to see some kind of rigid thinking and rigid response. And to be able to catch that in our reactions, in our tone of voice, in our attitudes. And then secondly, to start monitoring, to strengthen that ability that we have to not get stuck on the rim of the wheel, where we're just looking at our emotions, we're just looking at those negative thoughts, we're just looking at these needs that we have that we think will never get met. That's where we like to, that hub goes from the center of the wheel over to the rim, and you lose this broader perspective of awareness. So what I want people to do is basically do a very simple exercise. I start off with a 5 sense experience exercise. I get their spotlight of attention to get off their emotions, to get off their thoughts, to get off the distress that they're focused on, and get better at reconnecting with what they smell, what they hear, what they see, what they sense with their body, what they taste. And as soon as they start doing that, it brings down this level of threat that they feel like they're under. Why? Because in the 5 sense experiences, typically there isn't a threat. So where our spotlight attention stays most of the time, Brandon, is in the past or in the future.
Yeah.
So that's one of the core mental flaws that we have. Our unhelpful mind spends a lot of time in the past, a lot of time in the future.
Yeah.
And in doing that, we rob ourselves of the present. We rob ourselves of things that we can be grateful for, that we can enjoy, that we actually do have control over. But when we're in the past, it's generally filled with regret. When we're in the future, we're anticipating these things that we don't believe we're going to have control over, and don't know how to prepare for, don't feel equipped to handle. And meanwhile, this present moment is robbed. And that's where the people are that if we would be honest with ourselves, that's where we want to be connected with people. That's where we want to draw our strength from. And we lose it. We lose it because of that.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing that you bring up, because I've often analyzed this with friends and with my wife, having the conversation of, why is it that we feel so good when we go camping for the weekend, or we go on a hike, or we just go on a walk and we leave our phones at home? Is it because we don't have any items of stress in our life? There's nothing that's like fresh, in our perspective that's stressful on the tip of our minds or anything like that. And it's very true. When you get outside and you're in nature, you're very aware of your environment. And I think that a lot of times, and I'll just speak for myself, when I'm in my house and I'm doing my projects, or I'm in my office and I'm working, it's easy to kind of lose focus of where I currently am. Maybe that's just because it's familiar to me. Maybe it's because it's a place that almost like triggers distraction, or triggers kind of these conceptual thoughts, past, future, whatnot. And so once I get out of that environment, get away from phones or any kind of tech that might have a stress trigger, emails or whatever related to it, then I'm more able to actually bring myself back to my 5 senses, get into the present moment. And it's like, instant relief. I feel so much better. So gosh, you're really connecting the dots on that for me. That's super interesting to hear about.
Yeah. You've described it perfectly. And there are so many struggles that we have, I think, just staying connected with the present moment, in part because living in an age in which our attention has been trained to shift in fractions of a second, right? So every time I'm on my phone and I have Instagram on my phone, and I use my thumb, right? I can scroll like that. And how many times does my attention need to shift? Like in a minute, hundreds of times, right? That's bad for our ability to actually aim and sustain our attention on anything in general, but on the present moment specifically. And so just to give you a sense of like brain changes that are happening societally in children. So children today, the increase in nearsightedness of children is rapidly increasing. Why? Well, to have their brains to develop the ability to see distance, they actually have to be outside. They have to see further than 15 feet. But most children now are growing up having a focal distance, of about 3 feet
Mm,
from the things that they're interacting with. They're not seeing a ball come at them from 50 yards away and needing to train their nervous system to be able to track that and, coordinate their body to catch it or
mm,
do something with it or kick it or whatever.
mm,
And so, we're seeing so many children who are 5, 6 years old needing to get glasses
mm,
simply because their nervous system never got to develop outside.
mm,
But that means too, if they're, spending all this time on screen time, they're losing the ability to sustain and aim their attention, as they read a long paragraph
mm,
or a chapter, or listen to a long lecture. All kinds of things that really require, you know, you know, aiming and sustaining for sustained periods. Rote memory. You have to really work at, focusing to do rote memory work.
yeah,
And those abilities are going down.
yeah,
Um, so as adults, though, I mean, we're in the same soup as the kids are. We're we're with our screens and we're with our shows that have scenes really that last just a few seconds, and the scene changes and the motion changes and the music changes. And I love occasionally looking at a movie from the 70s when there's like
mhm,
no background music. I'm
mhm,
like, how did we watch those? you know
yeah,
and there's this 5-minute scene of someone walking or something like that. I mean, those days are gone.
I
you
know,
know
yeah, yeah. I recently just showed my wife had never seen that old classic Charlton Heston Ben-Hur. I don't know if you've ever
oh
seen
yeah,
that.
oh sure, yeah,
And the next one on the list I'm going to show her is Lawrence of Arabia. I don't know if you've ever seen that,
yeah,
Peter
yeah,
O'Toole, but
I
just some
have.
old movies that they're like 3 hours long and they're very
Yeah.
slow. And yeah, exactly the thing. They spend like 10 seconds just showing the person walking out the door and walk over to this other place. And there's no like quick cuts or anything. And so you have to have patience, and
Yeah.
it's you have to kind of just enjoy the slowness of the story. But it's
Yeah.
interesting, and I've observed this with my wife whenever we've watched these kinds of slower movies, is you get to the end of the movie and you almost feel like well rested. You don't
Hmm.
feel like angsty or like you don't feel
Yeah.
stimulated, you feel
Mhm.
relaxed. And I really
Right.
like that, especially because a lot of times we watch movies later in the day, so you're going to go to bed
Yes.
afterwards. I want to watch
Yeah.
something slow that makes me fall asleep, not something
Right.
action packed that's going to be like, now I'm awake for the next couple hours.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Right.
it is interesting how we oftentimes choose and are kind of advertised to pick different things that are very stimulating as opposed to other
Yes.
things, classical music, older
Right.
films,
Right.
books, lectures, things like that that would
Or just
slow us
quietness.
down. Just
Or just
quietness. Yeah.
Yeah. Just
But you
quietness.
know what? That's actually interesting that you bring that up, because a lot of times I hear people say this often. They say, "Oh, my brain is done and I just want to go home and do nothing." And they
Mhm.
say that word nothing, but what that usually translates into is scroll through Instagram and, watch
Yep.
Netflix. And that's their version of nothing. But that's not really nothing. That's still doing something with your brain.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It does not have that capacity, to get centered again and just be aware.
Mm,
Just be aware. Like, what's happening around me? What's my body telling me? What are my emotions telling me? What kind of unhelpful thoughts are kind of barking at me in the background, reminding me, that I just don't measure up and things aren't going to work out. What's really happening with my connections with others.
mm,
Um, and, being aware of that, that is centering, that
mm,
is quieting. And it's not necessarily easy to look at our thoughts or look at our feelings or look at the state of our connections with others, but it is reality. And that is the sign of emotional health is our ability to look at and face reality.
Mm.
Because those are the things. Reality represents, both opportunities and challenges for us. It's where we get a good meal, meaning that's where we get our needs met. We get our needs met in good relationships with others, but every relationship that we have with others is fraught with challenges. Disconnections between us and them, different expectations, different sets of needs, different ways of viewing the world, and then how do we navigate those challenges, face them so that we not only build good relationships with others, but have a stable life of our own.
Mm. Yeah.
That's the challenge.
Attention, as we're talking about here, that's huge, and
Yes.
yeah, it's absolutely a challenge. Thinking about what you're doing in the present versus the past, the future, the anxiety, the quick attention span that we seem to have. What else is there out there other than attention that might be causing distress or go ahead.
Let me go through a couple. So what I think is helpful for us is to realize that we're not so good at focusing our attention. Our attention is often in the past and in the future.
Yeah.
The second thing I already alluded to is that we don't realize that we are not our thoughts.
Right.
And it's very, very helpful, for us to learn how to observe, just to pay attention and notice, that I am this observer of this activity, but that activity isn't me. So that can be very powerful, especially in helping people who have been traumatized. People who have been in situations in which they were absolutely powerless, and their brain tells them you are powerless. And to realize that, so the brain is saying that, but that doesn't have to represent what that person's reality is, because we can, as an observer, say, yes, thank you, brain, for saying that to me, but this is the direction that I am going, even though I feel uncomfortable, even though I feel insecure, even though I feel vulnerable, I'm still going to move in this direction. And to realize that we don't have to be controlled by those thoughts or those emotions. So that skill of observing. But with that comes this, we need to have a clear picture of, but what direction am I heading? So that brings me to another point, that we have to be clear in our mind of what's important to us. Like what are our values? So values is a word that's used often in acceptance and commitment therapy, a kind of approach, cognitive behavioral approach of looking at problems. And we are easily disconnected from our values, in part because we spend quite a bit of time wrestling with our distress. But when we get reconnected to, okay, this is what I want to stand for. These are the, kind of character traits that I actually want to be living out in the situations that I'm in. When we're clear with that, we are strengthened. So let me give you a fascinating study that was done. This was done with Stanford students over a winter break. So these Stanford students needed, over the winter break, they're probably freshmen, I'm assuming, in an intro psych class or something like that. Most research is done with them.
Yeah.
So free guinea
that's
pigs.
funny.
Yeah. But over the Christmas break, one group needed to write about like good things that had happened in their day. The other group was asked to write about what their values were, why they were important to them, and when they have seen themselves kind of live consistent with those values and how those values actually help them, like dealing with the challenges that they have. So if they have a value of being authentic, or if you have a value of being loving or kind, like how is that value shown up in your life and been useful to you. So
Mm.
literally just for a few minutes over that, each day, these students would write about that. So what they noticed immediately, just in that 2.5 week winter break time, that the students who were writing out about their values had fewer health problems. They came back, more refreshed, more ready,
Mm.
than the students who were writing about something positive that had happened. And
Mm.
they thought, well, that's interesting. Well, it became more interesting because they started to track them over the next 3 years of their school. So the students who wrote about their values had higher GPAs. They spent less time visiting doctors. They had fewer, physical health issues. They were better at quitting smoking. They were better at losing weight. And they had higher GPAs at the end,
Wow.
all from one intervention.
Mm.
And what they realized is that those students continually looked at the situations that they were in and reminded themselves, but this is what I stand for.
Mm.
Everybody's going out drinking tonight, but I really want to do well on my test. So am I going to do what feels good, or am I going to do what is good?
Mm.
And they had the ability to stand back and look at, oh, there's a fork in the road. But if we don't see that fork in the road, we just go down the easy one.
Mm.
But if you have a clear picture in your mind of, no, this is the direction that I want my life to be going. This is the kind of person that I want to be. This is the kind of impact that I want to have on the people who are around me. And when that becomes clear, that becomes that music, that becomes that guiding principle that helps you to say, yeah, I feel that pull. I feel that automatic, oh, I got to go this way. I just need to relieve this. But then all of a sudden, I think another path opens up in front of us,
Mm.
and we're able to say, yes, but I would actually like to go in this direction. It might not feel as good in the short term, but in the long term, this is what's really going to help me. So this is actually something that I help people with. Let's say that they struggle with going to the mall because of anxiety about being in open places or crowded places.
Mm.
So what I would want to do is help a person, number one, realize that their noisy mind is noisy. It's going to be barking at them. It's going to be telling them, but they are not their noisy mind. Number two, I would ask them to try to picture their noisy mind like a grandmother. So my grandmother, when I was young, told me that I was going to die if I climbed trees, and I was going to get pneumonia if I went out with a coat on.
Mm.
If I picture my noisy mind like that, it kind of like says, yeah, thank you, mind.
Mm.
And so I give people the skill, or encourage them to practice the skill of saying, thank you, mind. Thank you. Thank you. I've got it from here. I know you're only trying to help.
Mm.
Then I would ask them to do something that's quite hard, which is to accept their distress. And so this is where we started off our conversation. And so our automatic strategies are generally to distance ourselves, to push our distress away. But when you're going into a mall and you have social anxiety, there is no way to get into that mall without that anxiety. It's like if you waited to not have anxiety to go, you would never go. You couldn't go. And your noisy mind is going to say, just order online. You don't need to go. But there is no growth without challenge. I mean, we cannot grow without, turning in the direction that's actually hard for us to go. So I would encourage that person then to learn how to say, I'm going to be willing to have this discomfort and do what's important to me. And so then we have to dive into, why is it that you want to go into the mall? Why is it that you want to shop? And picture it, my sister's having her birthday. I love my sister. I really want to get a personal gift for her. well, then you have a purpose, right? It's like, I'm doing this for her. And we would lay down our lives typically for the people that we love. And if you tap into that power for the things that you're doing, you tapped into a very strong force that pulls you through distress. So after Hurricane Hugo in Florida, after the World Trade Center was hit, 9/11, right? Researchers went and looked at who did well, who didn't do well after those huge events. The people who were on the ground, who experienced everything, that did not develop PTSD, did not develop anxiety, immediately did as much as they could to help others. And the more they helped others, whether it was financially or with material things or with words of encouragement or, volunteering or, just listening to others, the more they did that, the more protected they were from the negative impact of the trauma that they went through.
That is fascinating. Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That, you're really bringing to mind right now Viktor Frankl with
Yes.
Man's Search for Meaning,
Yes.
and it's fascinating thinking about, when people are in a state of despair, there's
Yeah.
World Trade Centers, pandemic, everything's gone
Yeah.
sideways in life. How do we react? Do we just say, oh, it'll get better, and we just do kind of the positive thinking, which over the past 2 years, I've heard a lot of positive thinking. And, there's some pros and cons to that, and it's interesting. But in the comparison to this idea of thinking of meaning in life, it seems to be, as you're quoting in these studies, more powerful. And it's so fascinating how really you're tapping into this higher motivation of purpose. And that just, it drives people so much further, and that is so fascinating to be unpacking that. And I think about that, you talked about some, the World Trade Centers and people helping with that. I remember I went and did a hurricane relief down in Texas. Which hurricane was that? I think it was Hurricane Harvey back in, I want to say 2017 or maybe 2018. And I flew down there with a relief group, and I cleaned up a bunch of stuff. And before leaving, I was really distressed. I was really sad seeing the news and seeing the damage that was done. And then when I went and helped, I felt so much better, like I didn't feel as distressed about it. And it just seemed like there was so much to do. There was purpose, I'm here on the ground, I'm working, I'm helping these people. I'm not just watching the news reels suffering at home helplessly. I'm active. I see the importance of what's happening right now. And I went back home and I felt a huge sense of purpose in my life. I didn't feel aimless or directionless anymore. And ever since then, I've always loved doing disaster relief work. But it's so fascinating, the point that you're bringing up. I think it's very true. Yeah.
It is. So tapping into that purpose, being able to turn toward our distress rather than away, and that's that acceptance and willingness. Being able to observe our noisy mind, but distance ourselves from it. Say, that's there, but it's not me. It doesn't represent me. And then being very clear with, this is the direction that I'm going. And keeping that ability to monitor, like, what is going around me? Is my thoughts, are my thoughts in the past, or are they in the future? Or rather, I should say, my spotlight of attention. Is my attention there, or is it over there, or is it right here? And then what is here, right here in front of me? And and what is there to do? And then that's kind of where we get back to, well, these are the things that I can control. These are the things that will help me, have a strategy. Because yes, there are problems, but there are steps that we can start doing to face those, even if they're small. And that helps to relieve us, because anxiety is that sense of threat and that sense of, am I capable of handling it, that relationship? And when we start increasing our sense of, there's something that I can do, that helps. And when we start getting a hold of our noisy mind, we actually start reducing that sense of threat, because a lot of that sense of threat comes from our unhelpful mind.
Yeah, that's very true. So people can, I'm gonna try to remember some of the things we've talked about here. Correct me if I'm wrong. We talked about attention, you know, and we were talking about now purpose that people can be finding. Those are two really, really powerful things that people can be doing in terms of relieving stress and anxiety.
Accepting would be a third.
Accepting. Okay. That's our third one. Okay. That's really powerful. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And that is going to look different in different people's lives. I always careful when I'm sharing these principles with people who are struggling, not to like cookie cutter it and say, and this is what it looks like in your case. You know, we each have to wrestle with, you know, what is this direction? You know, how do I learn how to do this acceptance and create space for this? How do I distance myself from my unnoisy mind, that letting go? You know, so the phrases that I use, real short phrases, is, you know, we need to learn how to stay connected to the present moment. That would be what we're talking about, not in the past or the future. We need to learn how to observe, like to just notice things and to realize that we are not our thoughts. Third thing is we need to learn how to let go. And that might be just thanking our mind and saying, thank you, mind. And then the fourth thing is this idea of acceptance, you know, to create space in our life for that discomfort that's there rather than trying to push it away. The fifth thing is being very clear or becoming clear over time with, you know, this is what I stand for. This is the purpose I want my life to go. And for me, what's central to that is character. It's like, what kind of character do I want to have in decision? Because I have control over that. I don't have control over outcome. I mean, I would like to be successful, but what I have control over is the kind of person I am when I work. I don't have control over the results of my work as much as I would like, but I can have integrity in the work that I do. I can do my work, you know, out of love. I can do my work out of passion, out of creativity, out of my love for learning. I mean, those are character strengths that I want to define who I am as a person, not the results of what I do, but like who I am on the inside. I want to match who I am on the outside. And it's like a never ending thing. I'm like never there. You know, I'm, you know, on this road, you know. And so, but that's that fifth piece, that fifth piece of, you know, really clarifying, but this is who I am. This is what I want to stand for. These are the character strengths that I want to have. And then that final piece, the sixth piece, is engagement. Being willing to take that hard step of like, I'm going to the mall. You know, I'm going to sit in that meeting and I'm not going to sit in the last row on the edge chair near the door. I'm going to sit right in the middle, you know, and that's a kind of challenge that an anxious person needs to find simple ways to start experimenting with. And it might be something that nobody would even know that you're doing. It might be just calling somebody, you know, where if calling somebody typically is an anxiety producing situation for you, to say, oh, I'm going to call somebody and just say hi, you know, or I'm going to go to a meeting without bringing my notes. Because when we're anxious, we love props. We love protecting ourselves. We love like, oh, well, and just in case, I'm going to have all these things. You know, it might be, you know, somebody who has, you know, panic attacks to, you know, walk out the door without their medication. And, you know, be out for an hour and come back and just kind of see what happens. But without those kind of challenges, without that engagement of saying, and this is why I'm doing it, you know, that we need to do it not because we're trying to control our anxiety, which is not going to work. We need to do it because this is the kind of person that I want to be.
Mm.
And when we move in that direction, I think a lot of power shows up by, this dual horses of, our values and our character. These are the things I want to stand for. This is the kind of person that I want to be. And we start harnessing those two things. I mean, we've harnessed something quite powerful.
Mm. Yeah.
So staying present, observing, letting go, accepting, clarifying what's important, and engaging.
You're reminding me with the engaging, just of different things I've done in childhood. I was homeschooled all the way through as a child. And when I was 14, growing up in Santa Barbara, California, they have an amazing city college there. It's one of the best in the nation. So I dual enrolled at age 14 and started taking, astronomy and all those classes. And I remember when I first went into class, I was age 14, and I went from only learning in the living room with my mom to suddenly I'm in the midst of a college, curriculum and class with everyone who's 18 and I'm little 14. And it was like, okay, I can either hide away and be super shy and I can just sit in the back. But I remember thinking to myself, I want to be a good student, and good students sit in the front, and I'm going to sit in the front of this class. And every class I took, I always sat in the very front of the classes, and I try to remind myself, make sure I ask questions of the teacher, because that's what good students do. I held on to that value, and I went from, the person who never wants to, I'm homeschooled, only at home, only talk to the people I know, to like, whoa, I really pushed myself. And it's an irony to me whenever I think back on that, because now years later, I teach anatomy and pathology and kinesiology. It's like, how did I end up at a teacher in front of people at a school? Like, I was that homeschool kid who didn't grow up in the academics and didn't do social settings, but it's because I had a purpose and I engaged, pushed myself to the front,
Yeah. And without risk, there's no growth. Without challenge, there's no growth.
Yeah.
And without, carrying our distress with us as we head in that direction, we're just not going to make it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, gosh, this is super powerful for folks just thinking about the pandemic, thinking about what's happening in Ukraine, probably unforeseeable other future events that are going to come upon people. And there's a lot that we're unpacking here that people can be looking into in terms of stress. I have actually kind of run out of space in all of my notes. I had to start rewriting things in smaller print and whatnot as you were talking. So whenever you saw me looking down, I was scribbling as fine print as I could. But I appreciate so much of what you've been saying. I'm sharing things from my own life because it's just so relevant. It's so relevant. I'm feeling the relevance of it. It's a lot of stuff that I've been searching through over the past 2 years, and I know a lot of other folks have been too. So I really appreciate you coming on and divulging into all those things. Before we wrap up here, though, I want to make sure I'm not cutting you off with anything. Is there anything that maybe we haven't talked about yet that you still wanted to hit? I know we're a little bit past the time that maybe we thought we would be in today, but it's just such a rich topic. There's so much to go over. Do you feel like we covered everything okay? Or did we miss anything?
We sure did. We covered a lot. We covered a lot. Yeah. The difficulty I think I have that is, I think, shared with many people is that we look at how we cope and we are hard on ourselves. We are excellent. Our brain is excellent at looking at flaws, right? You walk into a room, and if you're observant, your eyes will catch a picture frame that is like a centimeter or a fraction of a centimeter off, right? I mean, our brain notices flaws. But when we turn that spotlight of flaw finding at ourselves, oh my goodness, we can see everything that we're not doing right, what we should have done better, that, we should have known. And when we look at our coping strategies and we find ourselves struggling, a part of our noisy mind is to beat us up. You shouldn't have done that. you shouldn't have said that. You shouldn't have reacted like that. You shouldn't have quit your job. You shouldn't have, and it's very hard for us to have compassion for ourselves. But I think that's a fundamental quality that we need to have as this observer, this mind that is looking at the brain activity. The perspective that I want to have as I look at, the things that are going on inside of me is to have compassion for it. And not to, look at it in the sense of like, oh, that's out of place. That's wrong. I'm not doing that very good. I've lost my connections with these people over here and all this. And, I just need to look at that with a sense of graciousness and to look at life with a sense of gratitude. Again, our brain is fault finding. And as we do that, we miss out on the very powerful, brain changing perspective of having gratitude. You've probably discussed that, on previous podcasts and you hear about that. Gratitude itself is a game changer, in terms of how our body responds, what are happening in our brain, but having compassion, having gratitude, having kindness, are real core qualities to develop. And you don't have to be special to develop them. You can just intentionally set out to say, I'm going to start from this moment on, trying to look at my own life experiences, from a perspective of kindness. And that makes it easier for us to change. An encouraging coach, we respond to. A critical coach, it just sets up rebellion. Mm. And you just want to be a good coach for yourself.
Very true. Good coaches, gratitude, compassion. Evan, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on today. You've done a great job of taking something really heavy and making you got a lot of good laughter in there, making it really simple, helping people understand practical tips. I really appreciate it. It's huge. We need to hear more things like this. So your time is really appreciated today. Before we wrap up here, I'd love for folks to know, are there any ways that people can reach you, websites, or I know you've done some podcasting and some different things. Would you just let people know how they can get a hold of you?
You bet. Yeah. So the main website that I have that is focused on pain is called Pain Rehab Source, painrehabsource.com. And the podcast that I have on that is really just focused on some of the exercises that I use in my practice of helping people with chronic pain. So some breathing exercises, some mindfulness exercises, relaxation exercises, things like that. So I haven't been able to maintain an ongoing podcast creation, but the things that are there are being accessed by lots and lots of people. They're very simple. They're all about 10 minutes long and give people kind of a way to remember, like, how do I practice this skill? And the other website is drevanparks.com. And that's a way if people are interested in maybe having a webinar or a training for their work situation, or maybe even using me as a coach or something like that, personal coach, that they can contact me through drevanparks.com. And so I do some of that. My main work, of course, is working at Mary Free Bed Rehabilitation Hospital, which is in Grand Rapids. And I work in a pain rehabilitation clinic where we take people through a 10-week program and helps them get off the pain medications that they're using to be able to learn how to manage their pain without those medical standard approaches, and learn the mind-body connection and get their body moving again, which is the goal of rehabilitation.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, folks, check them out. Go to the website, check out the podcast. I've listened to that podcast before. So yeah, it's not like an interview style. It's more like you're kind of guiding people through things, which is great. And I love that you do that. So yeah, folks, please go check that out. Evan, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure and an honor that you'd come on the show again. Second time, great to talk to you. I wish you well. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity. Look forward to talking to you again down the road.
Thank you.
You bet. Take care.